Welcome to Podsauce. I'm Dax Holt.
I am Alicia Renee.
I'm excited about this next guest. I don't know what it is. It's like the commercial DNA testing stuff has me so fascinated, and I feel like I have so many questions for the host of this podcast. So the host of the podcast we're going to be talking about is called BioHacked Family Secrets, and TJ Raphael is our guest today. TJ, welcome to Podsauce.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to jump right into it. I want to know first off, well, give me your definition of what your podcast is about for people that haven't checked it out yet.
Yeah, so the podcast explores family secrets that were hidden away for decades and shielded in part by a highly lucrative but largely unregulated sector of the American medical system. And these family secrets are only coming to light now because of at-home genetic testing, things like 23andMe. So in the show, we follow the children, the now adult children of anonymous sperm and egg donors. Some of these people have dozens or hundreds of half-siblings in their quest to find their biological relatives, and then also learn more about the industry that created them. And in doing so, they're coming into direct conflict with this industry that wants to keep secrecy, that wants to keep anonymity, that wants to keep it as the standard. So that's the long way of saying what the show is about. It's about a lot of things. It's about science, it's about politics, it's about ethics, family, sex, relationships, identity.
It's so layered, your podcast, TJ, and what I mean by that is I listened to it from beginning to end, right? So the very first story that I heard was the one where the medical student was just like donating his sperm like 3 to 4 times a week, and so he guesstimates he has upwards of maybe 100 children out there, right? And so on one end, the donors should have their right to privacy if they sign over paperwork and children isn't something that they know. They want to be a part of their narrative, but they want to help other people bring life into this world. There's one side of it. And then you have the other side where these children are now adults and they're wondering who they are, right? Someone does something so innocent. And I'm saying this because this is what is depicted in her podcast. Someone does something innocent as gift someone 23andMe, right? And they find that they have siblings out there, and it's like, well, who cheated? So did my father, you know what I mean? Like my father stepped out on my mother, and there's that hurt and that pain and that turmoil. And then you confront your parent only to find out that an infertility is a very sensitive and heavy and challenging thing to talk about. And
formerly taboo, because that's what it's not so much anymore, so I think people might think of it
there's still a lot of taboo around infertility, especially on the woman's side. It's like, oh, you can't produce, you know, like you can't bring forth children. But in this particular incident, it's the father who carried the shame of what he felt he wasn't able to give to his wife. You understand what I'm saying? And so there's the unfolding of that. Your podcast was beautifully structured in how you showcase those two different dynamics. What are your thoughts on, I don't know if there is a happy medium, but the way you structured this podcast, was that your intention of trying to show maybe we need to work more on finding a happy medium?
Yeah, I think as the season continues, we go deeper into all of these issues. So it's really interesting. You just mentioned, women experience, or it seems that women experience infertility more often, but actually in 40% of all infertility cases, it's male factor infertility.
What I meant was we carry the blame. We get the blame. You're right. Well, yes. They'll blame women before they blame men.
Right. And I think that's a common misperception about infertility. Like in New York, if I walked down the street and asked 100 people what causes infertility, people would say, oh, it's a women's problem. But really, this is, a problem for both men and women. And when it comes to this question of balance, I think that's one of the reasons this subject got me so interested in the first place. I don't think it is a black or white issue. I don't think, in the case of Amber in our first 2 episodes, I don't think her parents were to blame as it related to the secrecy they were trying to maintain for decades around her true parentage, especially because back in the 80s and 90s, really up until I would say the mid 2000s, doctors were counseling people, never tell anyone this, do not tell your child, do not tell anyone in your life. So for me, it really feels like that shame and that stigma was reinforced by the medical community. And so you can't really blame a group of people or parents for following a doctor's advice, because that's what they were following. And also the medical community at that time could have never foreseen something like 23andMe. I think the human genome wasn't even fully sequenced until 2003. So the idea that somebody could mail away for something, spit into a tube, and then log on at home on a computer and be able to reveal all of this, I mean, that was at that time in the 80s, literally something out of science fiction. So,
but I have to ask you though, TJ, then what are your thoughts on the patient's right to privacy? All patients involved, right? Because if the donor says this is something that I want to give and I hope that it never revisits me, I mean, thankfully, at least what I've heard thus far, it has worked out for Amber and her now bio sister, right? He's their donor is, I guess, should I call him their donor father?
Yeah, they call him their bio dad.
Okay, so their bio dad, you know, he's not trying to come into their lives, you know, to parent. He's more like a good uncle, you know, that they've referred him to as a loving uncle, which is great. It worked out for them in that capacity. But his words, not mine. He may have hundreds of other kids out there, and I'm sure that's a weight he doesn't want to take on. So what are your thoughts about the donor's right to privacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really complicated issue. In our upcoming episode, we actually have on an anonymous donor who wants to remain anonymous, who wants no contact with his donor offspring. And he's caught in a really difficult dynamic because his mother, who's in her late 70s, did 23andMe, was connected with these his biological children, and he never had children. And she's from the South. She's like, oh, they're my grandbabies. I love them. And he's like, please stop. Like, I don't want to talk to them. And so it's created a really difficult family dynamic for him. And I feel for him. His name is Mike. I feel really deeply for him. Like, he signed up, he was 19 years old. He was still a virgin. And the idea that, you know, now he also donated his sperm 3 times a week for 3 years. Oof. He could have dozens or hundreds of children out there as well. And he's like, I just want to maintain my privacy. So I think that the industry really needs to step up here and fill in some of these gaps, because, you know, both donors and parents and now donor conceived people were working in a system that was created by the fertility industry. And I think the fertility industry needs to be writing a new playbook for how to navigate these issues. You know, the 2021 agenda for the American Society of Reproductive Medicine at their national conference last year, they were still talking about how do we maintain anonymity, how do we maintain privacy, where in my opinion, the conversation needs to be, you know, how can we make sure all parties are respected, their interests are respected, and what we need to be telling people going forward. And it is a really tricky situation. I mean, in some cases, you know, as it relates to medical history, you know, does a donor's right to privacy supersede, you know, someone with an illness and their desire for family medical information? I don't know. These are really big ethical questions that I think were not really taken into consideration when we first started kind of rolling out this practice.
I just feel like the human aspect overtakes it, right? Like the human need to belong, to have community, right? So you can even look at it in the regard of, you know, a medical situation where you may need a body part or whatever from family or an extended family. I'm pretty sure, and I haven't done this before, I don't think anyone wants what's going on over here, girl. So we're gonna just, I can't even give it away, honey, you know, let alone sell it. But, you know, ideally when you're filling out the paperwork, and correct me if I'm wrong, TJ, you would be more versed in this than I, just because you've done the research, but ideally when you're filling out the paperwork to become a donor, you have to give, to the best of your knowledge, a full scope of your family history and what your health looks like. And I say that just because in the first story with Amber, what was his name, the donor dad? Kurt. He was right. He's like, I feel like they sent me this letter under false pretenses, and, you know, that's not fair to him to, you know, to try to play on. One, it disrespects his intelligence, you know, that he couldn't see through it. And then 2, you're using this as a Trojan horse, you know, to get closer to me, which isn't fair to him, right? But there is some truth in, I just want to know if I'm going to get cancer sometime down the line because blah, 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 blah. So what then do you do in a situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. We actually have our new episode 6, that's all about that. So in that episode, we have the case of Brittany Johnson. She's now a 32-year-old woman, but she was conceived in the late 80s. When she was 6 years old, she fell down on a trampoline in extreme pain. Her mother, took her out of gymnastics class. They went into the bathroom, there was blood in her urine. It turned out she inherited a rare genetic disorder from her sperm donor. And her family wanted more medical information because to have symptoms like this at 6 years old, indicated that she might one day need a kidney transplant to survive. So her parents asked the cryobank for more information. They said no because of the donor's anonymity, because of his right to privacy. It took a years-long court battle, and in court records, it wound up being revealed that during his first interview with the clinic, he told them that his mother, his aunt, and his sister all suffered from kidney disease. The clinic wound up selling 320 vials of the donor's sperm, and there's a 50% chance that any child born from this donor will have the same condition.
Wow.
And that is not illegal because there's no law in the United States that says you cannot knowingly sell someone genetic information or genetic material that is tainted with a rare genetic condition. So that's just not the law. It might be unethical, but it's not illegal. So I think as it relates to the medical information aspect, that was viewed as a landmark case because it was the first time in history that a donor's privacy and anonymity was allowed to be breached in a legal sense. But at the same time, that cryobank that I just mentioned is still the largest cryobank in the world today.
Stop.
Yes, no, they are the largest exporter and distributor of sperm in the world. It's California Cryobank. I asked to speak with them multiple times and they declined.
She's like, what I will do is tell you who it was.
Yeah.
What I will do is let you know who it was.
So DJ, I want to ask you maybe a silly question, but
Sure.
Does someone have to send in their vial of spit or submit their DNA to be put into the system for people to be able to find them, or is there some other way that people are being found these days?
Yeah, so with at-home testing like 23andMe or Ancestry.com, if I were to do it, and I have done it, especially working on the show, is like, oh my God, is there anything in my background that I don't know about? That would make for great material. But yeah, so you can opt in to having relatives connect with you. But, if my cousin does 23andMe and I donated, my eggs a bunch of times and have kids out there, they're going to have a genetic match with my cousin. So essentially donors would have to tell every single blood relative within, a 1 to 2 degree, sphere from them, do not ever do any at-home genetic testing. The example I gave earlier with this anonymous donor, his mom did an Ancestry.com test. His mom didn't know that her son had been a sperm donor in college. And then all of a sudden, boom, there's a donor offspring there. So, individuals can opt out of having that familial connection via one of these websites, but you also have to tell every single person that you're related to opt out as well. Otherwise, you can be found crazy.
We had a bit of a family story come out with one of these tests.
Are you serious?
Yep. And,
talk to me. We're listening.
And it changed, like, no one saw it coming. It came out of nowhere, and there was a new family member.
Y'all got a black cousin out there, huh? You got a black cousin. I'll see you at the reunion.
And it brought up a lot of family stories and family secrets that no one knew about. I'm guessing, like you said, like someone had taken a 23andMe, and this person had come forward and said, I'm related to you guys, like crazy stuff. And, so I can see why this podcast has become so successful, because there's a lot of people out there that it resonates with. How often is your phone ringing now with people saying, I want to tell my story?
My inbox has gone crazy. We have a listener email address. It's biohacked@3uncanny4.com. And the listener stories.
I see what you did there, TJ. I see what you did there, TJ.
Got me. But our inbox is wild. We're actually, in our bonus series, we're actually running next week a listener story about a real switched at birth situation that only came to light because of 23andMe. I've been hearing from donor conceived people. I've been hearing from people who their parents were victims of fertility fraud, meaning their fertility doctor use their own sperm to help that person have a baby without their consent. I've heard from, people who found out that their sister is actually their mother, all because of DNA testing. So I think that as at-home genetic testing becomes more accepted, becomes more popular, more and more stories are going to wind up popping up that, people had no idea about. And I think people should think about this before they take that step to do an at-home genetic test. Yeah. It seems really fun, but you don't always know what you might uncover.
Pandora's box.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's why she called it Pandora's box.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're trying to get treated and you get tricked a lot of times along the way. I'll say this before we get into, obviously, with this being a podcast discovery show, we want to know your podcast picks. Just to circle back on something that you said earlier, I think that would be an ethical and maybe a beautiful way to start, right? Mandating full disclosure, right, on familial history genetically of what's going on, so that people can have a full window. I think that, and I'm not saying that desperate people will do desperate things, but what I'm saying is if you give people a choice and you lay out all of their options and then they move forward, at least they can move forward in good faith of knowing I knew what was going on and I still chose to go down that avenue versus I thought I was getting healthy sperm or a healthy egg, and then now some years down the line my family's having to pay for it. Because then you can eliminate the need for reaching out to people under the guise of medical, because you know what's there and we know how to proceed forward. That's a good ethical way to go forward to start.
I think, the people like Amber, and we're going to hear more from Amber later in the season because, she's kind of joined with an activist group. They've really taken a page from the adoptee rights movement. And they actually have a bill right now in the New York State legislature that would essentially mandate that donors provide actual records
full disclosure
to clinics, like from other doctors' offices, and that they would be legally required to also update their records every 10 years. Right now that's a suggestion, but I was texting the other day with a reproductive endocrinologist who works at a Manhattan clinic, trying to convince her to come on the show. And, she even said to me, donors are supposed to update their records, but not all of them do. And I'm like, yeah, if you're 21 donating and you go on with your life when you're 35, when you're 40, are you still thinking about that? And if a clinic closes, where would you even go to update them? So I think there's lots of different issues. I think it would, be in the best interest of donors as well, 1,000%. Who can then avoid these things down the line. Industry professionals that I've talked with say it's going to make things more expensive. And I think, that's a bigger conversation about for-profit medicine, right? That probably we don't have time for today.
Give us your top 2 favorite podcasts you're listening to right now.
Yeah, one of my favorite podcasts is the Savage Love Cast from Dan Savage. I have been listening to it for years. It's, sex, love, and relationship advice. I love, the messy drama calls that come in, and I just think it's a really fun show. One of my other favorites that I'm listening to right now is Who Weekly. It is like a pop culture podcast, and it talks about, the most C and B-list celebrities, and they're like, who? Why are they famous? So it's really funny and it makes me laugh. So those are 2 podcasts I'm listening to every week.
Awesome. I love it. TJ, thank you so much for coming by. If anyone wants to check out TJ's podcast, BioHacked Family Secrets, we'll put up a link on Podsauce. Just a great recommendation. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk to you.
From the beginning to end, you guys should listen to it. That's our suggestion.
Absolutely. So thank you again, TJ.
Thanks for having me.